news.
This is the news, and you are on Breakthrough. I'm Eugene Perrier.
And I'm Monica Cruz. It's great to share a screen with you, Eugene, after all of these weeks of filming remotely in quarantine.
Yeah, I guess from our collective living rooms to your living rooms out there watching the stream. Definitely good to be here with you, Monica. Unfortunate we couldn't be in person like we normally would be, but nevertheless, happy to be alongside you virtually, at least as we get into some news coverage here. And we've got, really a range of things we want to run through and talk to people, everything from the elections to skyrocketing nursing home deaths to really many different other manifestations of social struggle. We've got a whole range of stories we're going to get to here, probably some you've heard of, some you haven't heard of. So really excited to get into it as well, Monica, as we move forward.
Yeah.
Here.
That's right, and just a big thank you and shout out to everyone watching our video right now, everyone who's been giving us support, following us, sharing our content. If you aren't following us already, please do hit the subscribe button on YouTube, at BT Newsroom on Twitter and Instagram. We also have a Facebook, so we need the continued support. So keep sharing our content and encourage your friends and family to follow us.
Absolutely. So I just want to dive right into it. Over the weekend, the election campaign took a turn. It turned right into a China bashing fest. Joe Biden and some of his deep-pocketed supporters and super PACs going at Donald Trump for being too beholden to China. Pro-Donald Trump super PAC going back, same thing, claiming that Joe Biden is too beholden to China. It's all about China. So I wanted to show some of these ads here that came out over the weekend that have made some waves that people may have seen already. There's 3 clips. It's going to be hard not to respond between each one, but let's run through the 3 here, and then we'll talk a little bit about it and get into some of the implications. So this first one here is from Joe Biden's official campaign.
He failed to act. So now Trump and his allies are launching negative attacks against Joe Biden to hide the truth. Here are the facts. Joe Biden warned the nation in January that Trump had left us unprepared for a pandemic. Then, Biden told Trump he should insist on having American health experts on the ground in China.
I would be on the phone with China and making it clear, we are going to need to be in your country. You have to be open. You have to be clear. We have to know what's going on.
But Trump rolled over for the Chinese. He took their word for it.
The president tweeted, China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency.
China, I spoke with President Xi, and they're working very hard, and I think it's going to all work out fine.
Trump praised the Chinese 15 times in January and February as the coronavirus spread across the world.
It's a tough situation. I think they're doing a very good job.
Are you concerned about its potential impact on the global economy?
I think that China will do a very good job.
Trump never got a CDC team on the ground in China. And the travel ban he brags about? Trump let in 40,000 travelers from China into America after he signed it. Not exactly airtight. Look around. 22 million Americans are out of work, and we have more officially reported cases and deaths than any other country. Donald Trump left this country unprepared and unprotected for the worst public health and economic crisis in our lifetime. And now we're paying the price. All the negative ads in the world can't change the truth.
Okay, we're going to keep plowing ahead here. We're going to save our commentary. This next ad comes from American Bridge. That is a pro-Joe Biden super PAC funded by, big-time investors, real estate investors, Wall Street types, headed up by the political hit job mercenary David Brock. Nevertheless, here's their pro-Biden entry here over the weekend.
Everyone knew they lied about the virus. China. President Trump gave China his trust.
President Xi, I think they're doing a very good job.
And Trump gave China more than praise. He shipped China 17 tons of American masks and medical supplies. Our masks and supplies. Supplies we need now. Trump trusted China, sent China our supplies, and just look at the mess we're in now. ABPAC is responsible for the content of this app.
It's a lot of levels here. I just want to note that both these ads so far have employed the summer movie blockbuster deep voice guy.
Right.
You know, like Jaws 18 coming to theaters. So, you know, not to be deterred, the pro-Trump America First Action Super PAC headed up by Linda McMahon of WWE fame there. Wrestling, don't forget Donald Trump, a member of the WWE Hall of Fame, by the way, one of his many accolades. They responded or had some other things to say. It was really not an exact response, but their sort of generalized response to Joe Biden and their words being too beholden to China. So here's the America First Action ad.
For 47 years, the D.C. elite has made one country great. Joe Biden has led the charge.
I believed in 1979 and said so, and I believe now that a rising China is a positive development.
China stole American manufacturing and hoarded our emergency stockpile.
We're not trying to slow down Chinese growth.
Now more than ever, America must stop China. And to stop China, you have to stop Joe Biden. America First Action is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Now more than ever, we need to stop China. I mean, it's just so, I mean, you think like this is about the election in the United States. And you would think of all the things that people would have on their mind, the fact that tens of millions of people probably can't pay rent, can't pay their mortgages, worried about their utilities. The fact that, you know, there are definitely tens of millions of people who are out of their jobs, small businesses potentially being wiped off the map forever. You'd think that you would be thinking, looking at an election. Right, China. You have to talk about China. Like, why are you not talking about what your solutions are? I mean, Joe Biden, you can't even do anything until next year. So what are your solutions for the long term to actually meet the real everyday challenges that our Americans are facing? And the fact that he's putting more into this than into his, you know, ridiculous rollout around what he would be doing around actually helping people in a coronavirus situation tells you everything you need to know. I mean, it really is just disgusting on so many levels to see the whipping up of this kind of great power conflict, this kind of warlike rivalry, this new Cold War mentality. I mean, people should remember the last Cold War, which left 1 million dead in Vietnam and the military-industrial complex with a stranglehold on the United States. That people want that to be the kind of future for the 21st century, just against China rather than the Soviet Union. You know, to throw the future of this country into the toilet. It's disgusting.
It's sickening. It's sickening. And I mean, the fact that just because both political parties are saying the same thing, which I mean should be a clear indicator, how are these two opposing political parties accusing each other of being beholden to the same country? I mean, it makes no sense. But the fact that whenever there is some information about China, you know, claiming that there is a cover up for coronavirus, you know, some sinister maneuver that they were doing behind the scenes to minimize the crisis and, you know, hide things. And it's like, there's no question. It's just a general consensus. That's just it. China lied, China bad, and you know, it's just really sick to me too, the just incredible lack of integrity and honesty that we are seeing in these mainstream media journalists who are just regurgitating the same line of our politicians saying the same thing. And I mean, we just need to go through some fact checking first. I mean, the absolute lie that this was some sort of, again, sinister cover up on behalf of the Chinese government is absolute BS. At the same day that, you know, this Dr. Lee, an eye doctor who was penalized for talking about the coronavirus, on the very same day, the Chinese CDC was already sending its personnel and doctors to the Wuhan province to look into the coronavirus. So that timeline in this whole storytelling that we're hearing in the US media is a complete falsified. And on December 31st, that is when the Chinese CDC alerted the World Health Organization and alerted the American CDC about the coronavirus pandemic. It was the New York Times itself that reported that the Chinese CDC representative was crying on the phone to the American CDC head about the severity of the virus and what was to come, right? Inevitably. So you would think that instead of spending all of January and February criticizing the Chinese government's response and doing absolutely nothing to prepare, now we're in this mess. They want to talk about, oh, now we're in this mess. It is both political parties to blame.
No, for sure. I mean, you think about one of those videos talking about Trump saying, "Well, I was talking to the Chinese," and it had the date. It was February 12th, when no one, Democrats, Republicans, Andrew Cuomo, the so-called Democratic savior, all these people are saying it's not a big deal. Don't do anything. Don't worry about it. Go to work. We're keeping the schools open. So none of these people cared at all then, and now they're trying to turn it around on China. And I love how both the Trump ad and the American Bridge ad are like, they stole our masks. Well, the story that's out in the New York Times about this, that is, I believe it was out today, but that China is trying to give more masks to the United States. And these U.S. government officials don't want to take the masks because they're like, oh, well, it's going to play into Chinese propaganda efforts. So you've got, our frontline healthcare workers dying, and they're worried about, being shown up by China trying to send masks to save people's lives. I mean, it really is just unbelievable on so many levels, and so hypocritical on so many levels. And again, at the service of an unbelievable goal. I mean, you think about the Asia pivot, you think about the national security strategy saying we're going towards great power conflict, and then now here we are, both major parties promoting, new Cold War, at least style conflicts. I actually read, I think some Republican somewhere has now tried to sue China. I mean, it's just getting so absurd on so many different levels. But again, it just shows how out of touch these politicians are with everyday needs of where people are.
I mean, there's a casual way they speak about the possibility of a World War III. I mean, that would be absolutely catastrophic. Millions of people would die. Like, that is not, no one's gonna win a World War III. No one is gonna win. It's really sick, and it just goes to show again where our politicians' head are at, where the U.S. government really believes that profit and political power and having global hegemony is more important than the lives of Americans. And again, in January, in February, our Congress folks were in these private closed-door meetings, getting these security briefings, finding out how severe the virus was. And who did they decide to warn? Not the American public. They decided to go and warn their millionaire donors in these private luncheons, sitting there, like we reported in the segment that I reported on about all these disgusting senators selling stocks right before the economy crashed because of the pandemic. And I mean, they're sitting there comparing the virus to the Spanish flu of 1918, which killed millions of people. I mean, completely devastating.
United States.
Right, but who gets that information? It's the Wall Street millionaires and billionaires. Apparently, they're the only ones who have a right to get a fair warning in response to a public health crisis, not the tens of thousands of Americans who have already lost their lives, the tens of thousands more who are at risk because they don't have health insurance, because they can't afford to take off work, because they can't get paid sick leave. It's disgusting.
Yeah, it is. It is. And as a segue into our next story, I mean, it's also just worth noting the Yellow Peril racist atmosphere that hangs over all of this, and obviously has a long history in the United States going back to the 1800s. And it's more, it's some people would say, I don't see that, it's subtle, but you can just feel it in the overtones and the undertones of that ad, that it's more cynical because it's those people over there who aren't like us. And it reminds me of that Trump administration official, sadly to say here, a black woman, who said that the U.S.-China conflict is the first time the U.S. has been in conflict with like a non-Caucasian nation, and that this was some, major new challenge. So a lot to be said here. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I was just going to laugh about that. Let's go on to the next clip.
No, I know. Well, so speaking of racism, we know that one of the things that has been coming out a lot in the news, unfortunately, is the terrible racial disparities in coronavirus deaths amongst the African-American population in broad parts of the country, especially it seems in the Midwest, parts of the South, but really all around the country. So we want to play a clip here, a little hypocrisy here in this clip that we'll get to on the other side as well, but about this issue of these disparities.
Some congressional lawmakers say they aren't surprised by new data showing African Americans are at greater risk of dying from coronavirus.
Pandemic has highlighted many of the underlying concerns that the Congressional Black Caucus and Hispanic Caucus have been talking about for decades.
You've been talking about it, but what you've been doing about it is my first question. But what are your thoughts?
Listen, look. The question that people have to ask here is there is a long-term issue that goes so far beyond coronavirus that's being revealed at this. I mean, I said this the other day to people. I feel like a lot of the problems we see from coronavirus are, coronavirus induced, but not coronavirus caused. Right. And this disparity issue, that's how I see this, is you have, the long-term just complete and total disinvestment and also predatory businesses. I mean, we got there when it came to cigarettes and their level of sort of predation. But I think that we haven't talked about these chip companies, these soda companies, the sodium and all these things that are sold and marketed and pushed, at just the right price points for people to make it where, there's overabundance of diabetes, and then you have all these other issues and all these other factors that are structural and systemic, and then this virus comes in and it just starts wiping people out disproportionately, and it's tragic. But I'll tell you, the people to blame are at all levels. It's in the private businesses, yes, it's in the national politicians, but it's also in these local politicians and everybody who has really contributed to 40 straight years of complete and total disinvestment and destruction on multiple social, cultural, and economic levels in Black communities in America.
For sure. And I mean, let's just talk about, you go into any poor, working class, predominantly Black neighborhood across the states, what are the food options you're going to see? You're going to see the McDonald's open whenever. You're going to see all these other fried food and fast food chains. You're not going to see a lot of access to healthy food and fresh food in places, especially, where Black folks have been hit the hardest in the South and the Midwest. I mean, these are places where food deserts are such a major problem. People having to drive miles and miles to have any access to fresh and healthy food. It's absolutely disgusting. And I mean, this is how, the pandemic is just completely removing the facade of white supremacist capitalism right in front of our eyes. And let's talk about, here in New York City, now the Bronx is the epicenter of coronavirus deaths in New York. And right. This is a borough that has one of the poorest congressional district in the entire nation, the South Bronx. This is a borough that sees some of the highest rates of asthma, hospitalizations for asthma. For kids, it's 5 times the national average. And this is all systematic. This is environmental racism. This is how, just as you said, these industries are predatory towards our communities. It is just straight up, I mean, I don't want to be too hyperbolic, but it is a form of genocide, I believe. It really is. From the moment that we are born as Black people, we are already under attack. Let's talk about the high infant mortality rates in Black people, the high death rates of Black mothers in hospitals giving births. It's from every step of the way, in every possible way that we can be oppressed and that our body, our water, our air can be poisoned. That's what's happening to our communities. So it is no surprise at all that this pandemic is hurting the most oppressed people, the poorest people in this country the most.
Yeah, no, well, and I think, the hypocrisy of it, in that clip, and there's more to that clip of people from the Congressional Black Caucus and others who are speaking that we didn't show there. But that I talked about on the front end of that is where are you? All these people are here to point this out now. And you see the mayors and everyone, oh, this is so terrible, and to some degree sloughing it off onto Trump. Well, we've had this terrible response, and that's why all these people are dying, and completely just, denying the long-term impact of, really the structural shift of the Democratic Party towards quote-unquote neoliberalism, quote-unquote austerity, towards quote-unquote basically disinvesting and destroying these communities where everyone knew these things were happening for so long. And yes, some people said things, but I don't know, it just feels like in this moment, the thing that I don't want to get lost is, okay, everything gets blamed on Trump. And every big problem is well, since we had a messed up response from Trump, then everything is his fault. And we lose sight of the fact that, the landmines that are exploding right now were laid by a whole range of people. So it's an unbelievable situation, on so many different levels, Monica. And there's more to say about this. There's more to say about other things. I know we want to talk a little bit as well about some things that have been going on in the food system that I know you've been reporting on and looking into.
Yes, I mean, another defining example of how capitalism is not working, and how the most ludicrous wastefulness we are seeing here in the States as millions of Americans are waiting in line at food banks all across the U.S., right? So let's get right into it. Let's roll this clip.
It's heartbreaking. As millions of Americans lose their jobs and wait in line at food banks, farmers are destroying their crops. The dairy industry has been particularly hit hard by the coronavirus crisis. Consumption of milk is way down because schools and restaurants are closed. We were there as New York State dairy farmer Patrick Grimshaw poured his entire production of milk for the day down the drain. He's done it every day for 3 weeks. Estimated loss, $90,000.
We've been dumping, we've probably given away 500 gallons of milk so far to the public because legally we can't sell raw milk, but we can give it away. So anything we can do to help our community.
He says it's not practical to stop milking his cows.
There's no turning the cows off. To get up every morning knowing you're going to lose money and have to work just as hard as you did the day before.
Across the USA, other farmers like Paul Allen of Florida are also doing the unthinkable.
So far, we've lost over 4 million pounds of green beans, over 5 million pounds of cabbage, and I have a farmer friend that left 10 million pounds of tomatoes.
Millions of dollars in food have been donated, but farmers say there is only so much perishable food that charities can handle due to limited refrigeration. He says the industry is just not able to give food to those in need.
The charity system just can't handle it.
Even flowers are being thrown out. In the Netherlands, 140 million tulips have been destroyed. The entire season, which runs from Easter through Mother's Day, has been lost.
Wow.
It's just stunning. I mean, absolutely stunning. It was even, hard to watch that first farmer speak. You can tell he's like holding back tears. It's really devastating. And I'll let you speak in a second, G. Sorry, I don't want to get too much into this, but it really, when we really think about the food industry as a whole, and just like we've seen in so many other industries in recent decades, this nonstop consolidation and mergers, centralizing the power and the scope of this industry into the hands of only a handful of billionaire corporations that own literally every step of the way of the food supply chain. So, and this system is clearly unsustainable because one minor disruption, because we have 50% of the food in America going for commercial uses, going to schools and universities, hotels and restaurants. And now that all of these things are shut down, there is literally, it's going to take weeks now to reroute all of this food to get to our local supermarkets and to get to these food banks. But it's just very clear that this monopoly type situation that we have in the food industry is not working and is completely inefficient. And I mean, even before the pandemic, America wastes 40% of the food that it produces every single day. That's 400 pounds per person every year of food going to waste. Yet we have millions of Americans who are food insecure and who are going hungry. I mean, the contradictions are disgusting.
No, absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head right there. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's just when everything is set up for private profit, again, just to go back to a point I was making earlier with the racial disparities, when everything's set up for profit and everything's set up with this rot at the heart of the system where people's needs are just totally disregarded, when these emergency events happen, we just see the unbelievable devastation that can be wrought. And, people will be surprised how often this actually already happens, dumping milk and stuff in the supply chain, because it's totally beholden to, the whims of the market and things like that. And there's no way to have a society that, you look at hospital beds, food, whatever it is. There's no way to have a society that can say, okay, let's plan for the worst case scenario, right? Let's make sure that when we know global pandemics can happen, that we're ready to go with surge capacity, blah, blah, blah. No way to do that at all when you are beholden to profit. Why were hospitals just eliminating beds? Because they needed to have profit. Why are farmers having to dump milk? Because we have a strategic petroleum reserve to help the oil companies, to help some, random fracker with the money he's invested from Goldman Sachs or whatever to destroy the planet with this hydraulic fracturing. That person, we can find some way to top off the strategic petroleum reserve. We don't have a strategic milk reserve. We already have milk farmers who are in such a typical, terrible situation in this country. We have no price floor on milk. We need a price floor. It's like a minimum wage for farmers. Look it up, Google it. We need it. And dairy farmers who are really under the gun now, and even for the past few years, really, we need to start talking about these policies that are there to protect farmers so that these massive swings in these commodity markets don't just wipe out our rural areas. And then ultimately, we have to start talking about a food system that's oriented towards making sure people eat and we eliminate the hunger that 44 million people face here in America, not just specialized production for whatever hors d'oeuvres they were serving in, Pete Buttigieg's wine cave during his, election run. Let me not get off on too crazy of a rant here, but it's just unbelievable to just see people, having to line up at these food banks, people not having money,
right.
people worrying about starving on the street, and you have food that is out here and there's just no mechanism at all to do anything. Like, how could you want to live in a society that has no mechanism at all to help people in a crisis?
I mean, you're so right. Like, again, like we know pandemics, we've experienced this before as just a general, we know that it is inevitable that pandemics happen. And yeah, the lack of preparedness is so sick. And I mean, these food banks, it's just stunning. The images coming out, you're seeing hundreds and hundreds of cars line up, people waiting for hours. In a single day at a food bank in San Antonio, Texas, they serve 6,000 families, while tons and tons of fresh fruit and vegetables are being thrown down the drain. It just goes to show really who the system serves, right? And I mean, we can't eat money. We can't eat petroleum.
Yeah, that's right.
I guess that's news to our politicians. I guess that's really news to our CEOs. It's really sick, but I guess we can go into this a little more.
You got a lot of fake politicians out here too. I want to talk about how fake these politicians are, because you look at a lot of these people at these food banks. Why are they even in the line? Because politicians, we put in all this money on unemployment insurance, $600 extra. We saving people, patting ourselves in the back. When the unemployment insurance system is just destroyed, messed up, can't even work right on a regular day, surge capacity, people aren't getting the money. So people, even who are eligible to get this so-called money that these politicians are patting themselves in the back for, aren't even getting the money because they have allowed these unemployment insurance systems to just completely and totally devolve, just for the reason of not caring and having other priorities of what you pay for. You think about it, we've spent $5.3 trillion in America in the post 9/11 wars. Imagine if we had invested that in anything actually worth doing, as opposed to going over occupying and bombing and killing people, if we would be in this situation. Like, people should really ask themselves that and think about that when they think about the political direction they want to take things. But, let me not get too carried away. I want to just quickly mention one thing that we have already mentioned at the top, that everyone is watching. You're here on YouTube, wherever you are. We need you to subscribe to our YouTube page. Follow us on all of our social media platforms, BT Newsroom. We really need everyone's support here. This is grassroots people's media. This is not big business. We don't have a $50 million advertising budget sitting there behind us. So if you like what you're doing, subscribe to us, follow us, like us. A lot of the stuff we've even talked about today on this show, we've gone more in depth, and you can see it on our feeds. You can see it in our videos, and we look forward to watching you with us. So I had to interrupt my rant a little bit there, Monica, just to bring that up, because it really has been gratifying to see the support we've gotten so far, but we want to take it to another level.
Most definitely. Well, we're going to move on now to our next clip. Can we pull that up?
Yes, the nursing homes issue here, which is it's hard to even know what to say about this. I mean, this is like actually a stat from a few days ago, but I just want to say it because it was notable. It's actually from last week, but they were measuring the nursing home deaths from like the 10 days prior, and it was a 704% increase in nursing home deaths in the U.S., which is just unbelievable. It's getting a little bit more coverage now, but I really think that this is a major crisis among senior citizens. But let me not say too much about that. Dr. Nadia Marsh, who is a collaborator of ours here on BreakThrough News, she's obviously a medical doctor, also lost her own father in an assisted living facility recently, and she spoke to us a little bit more about the nature of the crisis in nursing homes now and assisted living.
Nursing homes throughout the country, they're probably in the range of the tens of thousands. My father died 5 days ago. His roommate died 12 hours after that. And I think it's a combination of factors, the reason so many older folks are dying. Number one, the Trump administration made a conscious decision not to provide test kits, and this was done because they wanted to utilize the capitalist market. They wanted private companies to take ownership over those test kits. And so that meant that tens of thousands, and actually hundreds of thousands of nursing home folks were never tested. So nursing homes couldn't possibly separate those who were infected from those who weren't. And the workers weren't tested either. And then you add to that that staffing wasn't increased during this period. The CDC they knew that this was going to be an explosion. The geriatric organizations told them that up to 50% of nursing home patients could die if they didn't do anything dramatic, meaning basically separating patients who are infected on different wards and making sure that workers were tested and increasing infection control. So those are all things that the Trump administration failed to do, and I would call that medical manslaughter.
Well, I mean, it's a tragic situation, Monica, and so much of it seems to result from
just the utter lack of preparedness. I mean, one of the
disrespect
first things,
to our older Americans.
Oh yes, I mean, what is that saying? That you can tell a lot about a society's values by how they treat their elders. And I mean, we see poverty among those 65 years and older dramatically increasing over the past decade or so. We're not hearing about this, but that's the reality for millions of our senior citizens across the states, right? And as well, one of the first things that we learned about the coronavirus, or that people were speculating about it as scientists in China were looking into it, they realized that elderly folks have a much more likely chance of dying from the virus, right? So this was something that we had already known before the pandemic fully hit the States. So just the utter lack of preparation is disgusting. The lack of protective equipment for these workers in these nursing homes. I mean, the fact that it's probably very difficult to social distance within a nursing home. So as soon as one person catches it, we understand how deadly and contagious this virus is. It is such a shame, and it is just so sad, and just again so indicting of this entire system as a whole, while we can't even care for our elders.
Yeah, no, I mean, and shout out to all the long-term care workers out there that are overworked and underpaid already. I was once at a rally of home health care aides, and it was a powerful rally because the guy was saying it was about them trying to get $15 an hour minimum wage. He was like, we show up, when it's snowing, we should, like, at all the times you think it's the worst, like, we're there to, like, help people, and that's what we do, that's what we love to do. But, they don't get that respect. You got these big capitalist assisted living corporations that, are just warehousing people, not treating the employees right, not preparing them now. And I think you're right about how we measure our society here. I mean, what level of respect are we going to, we know this is a disease that overwhelmingly affects, so far at least, older people, and it just seems as if the response has not been to surge. I mean, I'm almost laughing because what do? You laugh as you keep from crying, because it just seems like, well, I mean, what are we even doing here? If we're not going to protect the population we know to be the most vulnerable, you sort of known risks, and it doesn't seem like there's any movement at all to head off known risks. And it's one thing, because it's easy to be cynical, and I think for a lot of radical people, it's like, oh, well, of course the government isn't doing anything. Of course, and like, okay, yes, of course. But on the same token, I don't think we can lose our sense of outrage, because it really is just completely outrageous, quite frankly, the conditions we've run down, from the racial disparities, through the food bank issue, through now the nursing home deaths issue, to just see how so many glaring, obvious, pointed out errors in the systemic reality of capitalism are just, totally unaddressed, and that there's just no plan at all. And here's another thing. I'm sorry to go off topic. This is the last thing I'm going to say on this rant before I get back to you. But yeah, when all these companies started donating like millions of masks, like when Facebook was like, oh, we're going to donate like 7 million masks. Why does Facebook have 7 million masks? And the only thing I could actually come up with, though, is that undoubtedly they're paying lots of money to security consultants who are like, hey, you might want to stockpile like 10 million masks because it could go down. So for the government, it's not like people weren't ready. Twitter got 695,000 masks, and you telling me that we can't get PPE for nursing home workers? I mean, okay, yeah, America the Great, the psych.
Ridiculous. And to connect this a little bit to this whole anti-China tip, it's really funny how, again, one of the big criticisms of China's response to the virus was, oh, they're underestimating the number of people who are dead. They're covering up how many people are actually dead. Meanwhile, it's our own politicians now struggling to get that number right. It's our own mainstream media who are, you know, like, oh yeah, it's really hard to get these numbers accurate. Yet just a month and a half ago, they were crapping on China for the same thing, right, and talking about how it took them even weeks to start counting for all the folks who are dying in nursing homes. So I can't even imagine the countless others who were not counted in those numbers. Not to mention folks who are dying in their own homes, because I know in particular here in New York City, in the epicenter of the pandemic right now, I am hearing from multiple friends, from multiple people I'm organizing with, who are having really intense symptoms, who were told when they try to call up EMS or try to call up 911, it's not, don't do it. Just take care of yourself. Do not even bother trying to get yourself to the hospital until you literally cannot breathe. I mean, how sick is that? So we have countless numbers of people dying within their own homes because our hospitals cannot handle this pandemic. And just like you said before, I mean, what was the number? About 20,000 hospital beds in New York alone that were lost. I remember you had that statistic.
20 years, over 20 years, New York State lost 20,000 hospital beds.
And why? Because it looks better for these hospital corporations to say that they have like a 90 or 95% of their beds filled, right? That's how they get more investors, because it's like, look, we're staying busy. So why they closed all those hospitals in New York in these recent decades was to just make them look better, was to make them more money. I mean, how sick is that? It's just so clear that when we are placing profit over all else, we are going to see this nonstop death and destruction of our people and of our environment. And that's why we're here today.
That's true. Well, you know, as the OJ song says, for the love of money, people will kill their own brother. Well, you know, I want to transition to something that is, I don't know if it is more upbeat. It's also negative, but it's at least a sign to show here. And I want people to know this. And I think it's important to know this, that people are also fighting back on, you know, pretty much every level. And in the state of Pennsylvania, there has been some big pushback and fight back going on to reopen hospitals and healthcare facilities, particularly Hahnemann Hospital in Philadelphia. And you've got big investors and public officials not doing what needs to be done to reopen these healthcare facilities. Put People First PA, which is a group there on the ground that fights for healthcare rights, recently took some action on that. So we wanted to show a clip and talk a little bit there.
We're outside Mayor Kenny's house. We're putting pressure across the state on power holders to reopen the hospitals that have been closed. Across the state of Pennsylvania, there have been dozens of hospital closures over the last decades. In particular, we're taking action in Lancaster, in Altoona, in Pittsburgh, and right here outside Mayor Kenny's residence. And specifically here, we're asking for them to reopen Hahnemann Hospital. Far too long. It's gone on far too long. Somebody's hurting our people, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore.
Healthcare is a human right.
That's right. Healthcare is a human right.
Fight, fight, fight. Healthcare is a human right. Fight, fight, fight. Healthcare is a human right. Fight, fight, fight.
Well, you know, certainly, you know, heartening, encouraging to see people willing to, you know, as the Bernie Sanders movement made famous, fight for someone they don't know and for those they do know. You know, obviously, if, you know, this Hahnemann Hospital situation, you got the dude who owns it. This hospital basically just closed. Is saying that he wants to charge people like $1 million a day or something wild, like how you could own something and just be like, yeah, worldwide global pandemic, I just own a hospital, I'm doing nothing with it, and you got to pay me to use it, is wild to me, and just talks about the perverse incentives of property ownership.
Exactly. And I mean, how can these two things coexist, to have a for-profit medical system and also be saving lives, right? The whole point of healthcare is to take care of people, but taking care of people and bettering the lives of millions of people is expensive and is not profitable, right? So it's really no surprise that we are seeing these contradictions and that this pandemic is really revealing it in its entirety of how sick it is. I mean, what is the point of making a real cure to a particular disease if you can make millions selling people, all these different pills or whatever, and giving them all these different treatments to treat the disease? What's the point? And it's like, we think about a tiny country like Cuba that has been under the weight of the US embargo for decades, a poor country, and they're able to have one of the best healthcare systems in the world and guarantee healthcare to every single one of its citizens, right? And they have been handling the pandemic incredibly and sending out their doctors everywhere to take care of people dealing with the pandemic, right? So it's just very clear that the American healthcare system has no answer to actually taking care of our people.
Yeah, I mean, almost no one is doing it worse than America. Ecuador, maybe, where the terrible, right-wing government of Lenin Moreno just is thousands of people. It's just tragedy right now. It's happening in Ecuador. But, be that as it may, you're 100% right. I mean, here's one thing that I think will blow people's minds is that, okay, so Trump is saying, well, we're going to pay for people who don't have health insurance to get the coronavirus coverage. Makes sense. Crisis of unemployment. Also a crisis in healthcare. It means tens of millions of people could be getting government funded care for coronavirus, right? And so they're, okay, well, the government being forced to do something, and good, they should be paying for it, don't get me wrong. But because people who do have health insurance are using a lot of health insurance and they're getting sick with coronavirus, and people are having major procedures here, major healthcare, it's spending a lot of money. It means that almost assuredly insurance premiums will skyrocket next year to actually deal with that. So even though on the one hand it's sort of like, they give it then take it away. Oh, don't worry, we're going to cover people who don't have insurance, and then but by the way, next year you're going to get incredibly price gouged and maybe go bankrupt from your healthcare insurance because of this ridiculous for-profit system of paying for healthcare. I mean, it really is unbelievable on so many levels.
The fact that America spends more on health insurance per citizen than most other advanced nations who are able to provide some level of public health care to its citizens, I mean, is absolutely crazy. How are we paying more but getting the least? And I mean, to our politicians, but what about the big banks? What about the big billionaire health insurance companies, right? We got to bail them out first. That was the first move that our politicians made when the pandemic really started to hit. We started to realize what was to come. What was the first move that they did? Transfer over trillions of dollars from the Federal Reserve to bail out all these Wall Street banks, right? I mean, I guess they need to be saved. These banks need to be saved more than everyday people, the people who keep this country running, the essential workers who are still getting paid wages that they can't live on, who are still being forced to go into work without the protective equipment that they need. These are the people who are dying, and it's very clear that these are the people who are not a priority to our system.
Yeah, no, for sure. And frontline workers, many of them coming disproportionately from Black and brown working class communities, which also builds into that racial disparity conversation that we had earlier. Well, a lot that we can always say, a lot that we will continue to say on Breakthrough. I think that really exhausts it for all of the clips we had today, Monica.
Definitely. Well, we want to give a huge thank you to everyone who's been tuning in. We really appreciate your constant support. And again, please subscribe to our YouTube page. Please follow us on social media, share our content. It is so important that we get this narrative out in the midst of all of this disgusting mainstream media coverage. We really need to get a real perspective of working class and oppressed people out there. So please support our work and share our work.
No, absolutely. And as always, don't just watch us, join us on Breakthrough.